That morning, inside the grand ceremonial hall of the Pentagon, everything looked perfect. Crisp uniforms, gleaming medals, overhead lights casting halos over the silver hair of legendary generals. And me? I sat silently in row 10, just a name on a list, just a shadow among a forest of honors. No one saw me, except for him, my father, General Richard Bennett, a living monument of the U.S. military, a man I had spent my entire life trying to earn the approval of. Yet somehow, I was never enough to be worthy of his gaze. Sitting beside him was my brother, Jason, the heir to the Bennett military dynasty, West Point golden boy, handsome, flawless, always the pride of the family. And me? I was the ink blot on an otherwise perfect report, the girl who read books in a family that worshipped bullets. I thought I'd sit still, just like I had for the last 35 years. I had mastered the skill of becoming invisible. So much so, I sometimes forgot I was even there. But then, that moment came, when the MC began to read the citation, not for a sniper, not for some high-risk mission, but for an officer who used language, not weapons, to save lives during dangerous negotiations. I knew they were talking about me. I didn't need them to say my name. I was used to going unnamed. But he, my father, he couldn't let me have even one moment of recognition. He stood up, not to clap, not to walk out, but to interrupt. He raised his hand, not to salute, but to shut it down. And then, in front of the entire United States military, with the same voice that had once commanded thousands of troops, he used it to humiliate his own daughter. 7 languages? Useless. The military needs warriors, not some soft bookworm linguist. I didn't need directions. The entire room turned. Every head pivoted to find the bookworm the general had just shamed. And they found me, Claire Bennett, military police captain, a woman who had walked the line between life and death without ever needing to fire a single bullet. I sat there, hands clenched in white gloves, throat closing under the weight of the man who gave me life and nearly crushed it. And Jason? He didn't stop him. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised, just smiled, smug, satisfied, like he'd finally won. I was ready to be swallowed whole by the shame, but then another voice cut through, softer, but heavier than 1,000 tons of steel. It was General Thomas Gray, Chief of Military Intelligence. He didn't look at my father. He looked at me and said, "Bring Captain Bennett up here. We need the whisperer." The room fell silent. Then someone stood, a major, then a colonel, then everyone. They all stood, for me, not for my father, not for Jason, for me. I walked up, past Jason, his grin now frozen like a cracked mask, past my father, still standing, his face pale, his eyes lost. For the first time in my life, I looked him in the eyes and saw fear, not anger, not disappointment, fear. The kind of fear a man feels when he realizes his power means nothing anymore. I should have felt victorious, but instead, I felt something open, a door in my mind, and behind it, I saw that 17-year-old girl again, clutching her Georgetown acceptance letter, thrown aside, ignored by her family during Thanksgiving dinner. Back then, I believed that if I just tried hard enough, someday my father would see me, that my value depended on his recognition. But not that day, Not in the Pentagon. Not when I stood on the same stage he once ruled with thunder. That day, I realized the light doesn't just belong to the loud. I am Claire Bennett. I was once the forgotten daughter in a family of heroes. I was once called useless. I was once shamed by my own blood before an entire nation in uniform. But that day, I stepped out of the shadow. I didn't need anyone's approval. I just needed to stand up and say, I am here. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed by the very people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, then this story is for you. Don't leave. What I just told you about was only the beginning. What's coming is resistance, betrayal, a silent war I survived, and I'm ready to tell it all. For those who haven't yet found the courage to step into the light, stay with me until the very end, because sometimes the only thing you need is the right whisper at the right moment. You are not invisible, and you are not alone. Subscribe to this channel to follow my journey from a useless human dictionary to someone who turned silence into a weapon. Leave a comment. What was the moment you felt most overlooked, and how did you rise above it? I'll read every single one because your voice deserves to be heard. I grew up in a home where everything was measured by rank, medals, and silence. Not silence from a lack of words, but the thick, suffocating silence of expectations, the kind that stares at you without ever saying it out loud. You don't belong here. My father, Richard Bennett, a general who carried both the weight and the chill of the military, loomed in our house like a mountain, unmoving, unforgiving, unreachable. To him, there were only two types of people, those who fight and those who don't deserve to be looked at twice. Very early on, I realized I belonged to the second group. As a child, I used to think maybe he did love me in his own way. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe if I tried a little harder. But the older I got, the more I understood. Some kinds of love don't arrive late. They just don't exist. My brother Jason was the opposite, a perfect replica of my father. Tough, handsome, athletic. He excelled at every physical challenge. By high school, they were already calling him the heir to Colonel Bennett. And me? I could speak fluent French and recite Rimbaud by heart. I devoured dictionaries. I lived in books. I had a gift for hearing the subtle shifts in language and tone. To my father, that wasn't talent. That was a defect. We lived in standard military housing at Fort Riley, Kansas, an old wooden house where dinner felt more like a mission briefing. Seats were assigned by hierarchy. Every word had to be clear, concise, and above all, emotionless. My mother, Elizabeth, had once been a professor of linguistics, a gentle woman, careful in her words, with a smile that always seemed a little sad, as if she carried an unspoken sorrow. She was the first to teach me that language could be love, that words could be weapons. She died when I was 13, and with her, the only person who truly saw me was gone. Thanksgiving, when I was 17, I received a letter from Georgetown, a full scholarship to study linguistics. I read that letter 100 times. I ran my fingers over the deep blue embossed seal, feeling as though I was touching a doorway to another world, a world where a girl like me no longer had to live as a shadow. I carried that letter like a treasure all day. With every step through that house, I held on to one small, fragile hope. This time, maybe he'll finally see me. This time, I thought. Maybe he'd be proud. That evening, the entire Bennett clan gathered. Aunt Rose, Uncle Frank, and the usual parade of relatives, all too familiar with flattering my father and praising Jason as the living embodiment of military glory. Jason had just completed his first year at West Point, and the house buzzed every time someone brought up his grueling training or the praise he'd received from commanding officers. I sat quietly at the edge of the table, pushing green beans around my plate, listening to the endless accolades, one hand brushing the letter hidden in my skirt pocket. I had waited all evening, just for one opening, one chance to be seen. When the pumpkin pie started making its way around the table, I pulled out the letter. My voice barely registered, even to myself. Dad, I have something I'd like to share. I placed the letter on the table, gently pushing it toward him. The room fell silent. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms folded. That bored look in his eyes said everything, as if he already knew how this would end. My father picked up the letter. His eyes glanced over the Georgetown seal, but he didn't open it, didn't ask, didn't smile, didn't even pretend to care. He simply placed it back down, next to a half-eaten chicken bone, tucked between a crumpled napkin and a stained bowl of cranberry sauce. A smear of red had soaked into the edge of the envelope, a fake blood stain on a very real dream. He didn't look at me. He looked at Jason, pointed at him with a polished silver fork. Look at your brother. Jason's learning how to command an entire company. That's the future. And what will you do with that piece of paper? Translate poetry for tourists? The chatter around the table vanished. No one laughed. No one spoke up. Every eye fell back to their plates. I felt every blink of avoidance, every awkward nod, the silent complicity of a room full of cowards. Jason shrugged, feigning indifference, but I saw it, clear as the night Mom died, when he hid her favorite Italian book before I could find it. Smug satisfaction, the twisted pleasure of watching me be humiliated without even raising his voice. Then my father stood, raised his glass. Let's toast Cadet Jason Bennett, the pride and future of the Bennett family. Glasses clinked. Voices chimed in. Cheers! No one mentioned my name. No one looked back. I slipped away from the table, back to my room, clutching the old French dictionary my mother left behind. She once told me, "Your mind is a weapon, Claire. Don't ever let anyone convince you it's worthless." But that night, I believed them. I believed that my intellect was a burden, that my love of language made me strange, a misfit in a family that valued bullets over books. I cried, not loudly, not theatrically, just small, sharp sobs buried deep in the pillow, the kind of cry from someone who finally understands their place in a system that was never meant to include them. And in the darkness of that night, a question carved itself into my mind like a cold blade. Why am I trying so hard to earn approval from a man who decided long ago I'd never be worthy? Why am I playing a game where the only queen on the board, me, is treated like a pawn? I knew the answer. You don't win in a rigged game. You get up, you walk away, and you build your own damn board. The next morning, I left Fort Riley in the skin-splitting Kansas cold with exactly 2 possessions: a scholarship letter stained with cranberry sauce, and the tattered French dictionary my mother left me. I didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. I knew they wouldn't ask where I went, and if they did, it'd only be to make sure I wasn't doing anything that might embarrass the Bennett name. Georgetown was another world, stone hallways steeped in history, church bells echoing through the air like a quiet kind of baptism. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't treat difference like a mistake. There, a girl who loved language wasn't seen as useless. There, I didn't have to shout to be heard. I just had to speak. But even in that new world, there was still a scar inside me. A dull, cold ache with a single name carved into it, my father. One day in class, a professor lectured on language as a soft weapon, a tool to end war before it starts. I remember laughing, a dry, hollow laugh no one else heard. In my head, my father's voice came crashing in. 7 languages, useless. So I buried myself in study. The more brilliant I became, the emptier I felt. It was like digging a moat so deep no one could ever cross it. I didn't call home. They didn't call me. Each holiday I stayed in the library, and sometimes I wondered, if I disappeared from the world completely, would my father even notice? After graduation, I didn't pursue a PhD like most of my peers. I didn't join the UN or work for international think tanks. I did the one thing that would probably make my father die of fury. I joined the military, not as a linguistics analyst, not as a translator in a cushy office. I enlisted in the military police corps. My father always said MPs were the unit for people not good enough to lead, but too stubborn to wash out. I didn't choose it to spite him. I chose it because I wanted to know. If I stepped into his world, the world he worshiped, would I survive or would I be crushed? Just like he always predicted. My first assignment was Fort Drum, New York. There, winter wasn't just cold, it was punishment. Snow never stopped falling. The wind cut through every seam in your coat and sank straight into your bones. But physical cold was still easier to bear than the frost in my fellow soldiers' eyes. I was the only female MP in the unit, the only one with a degree in linguistics. They called me Georgetown, a joke. Sometimes they called me the human dictionary. Not in admiration, but like I was some kind of alien creature they didn't know what to do with. Anytime I opened my mouth to offer cultural context or psychological insight, I'd catch them glancing at each other, suppressing laughter, whispering behind coffee mugs. We need someone who kicks in doors, not a damn poet. My commanding officer, a grizzled old captain who believed muscles solved everything, once looked me straight in the face and said, "You think the enemy's gonna surrender because you corrected their grammar?" I didn't argue, didn't push back. I just nodded, went back to my room, locked the door, and opened up recordings of old interrogations. I played them again and again, not listening for answers, but for pauses, wavering tones, changes in sentence structure. I read more, bought books with my own money on criminal psychology, forensic linguistics, tactical anthropology. I took notes by hand, built the first matrix of grammar and psychological patterns. No one knew. No one needed to. I was a shadow. But I was a shadow that listened. I didn't make friends, didn't go to parties. On winter nights, when the barracks were dark and quiet, I sat at my small wooden desk under the soft yellow light, poring over folded pages, headphones pressed tight against my ears. I remembered Maya Angelou's poem, "Still I Rise." I read it to myself every night like a vow. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, but still, like dust, I'll rise. And then it happened. An opportunity. Like all true opportunities, it arrived wearing the face of failure. A weapons smuggling case had been stalled for weeks. The suspect, a civilian contractor, had been caught, but no one could get a single word out of him. The reason? He spoke only a rare dialect of Pashto, one spoken only in a remote valley region. No one in the unit understood him, except me. I walked into the interrogation room, stale coffee, cigarette smoke, no tactics, no threats. I just sat down and began to tell stories in his language. I spoke of his homeland, of famous poets from his region, of legends his mother might have whispered to him as a boy. And for the first time, his eyes changed, not with suspicion, but with longing, with grief. 2 hours later, he confessed everything. I walked out of that room with a fully signed statement. The hallway outside was dead silent. No one said a word, but I saw it. The shift in my commanding officer's eyes. The contempt was gone. The smirk was gone. In its place was respect. No medals, no ceremony, just a first quiet moment where they finally listened. It wasn't a triumphant victory, but to me, it was the first crack in the wall that had caged me all my life. I didn't need my father to clap. I just needed to know I existed, that my whisper could change the game. Fort Drum lay under endless snow. The nights were so cold the wind screamed like a blade through every crack in the window. Loneliness wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a default state. But I didn't break. I didn't need the false warmth of hollow praise or empty handshakes. I had something of my own, silence. And in that silence, I sharpened every piece of knowledge I had, like honing a dull blade. Slow, deliberate, but razor sharp at the core. After the Pashto interrogation, I didn't become a hero. I didn't get promoted. No one invited me to speak. There was no celebration. But the silence changed. It no longer smelled of disdain. Now it held a different flavor, watchfulness, the way they looked at me in the hallways, like maybe they were starting to understand. I wasn't a human dictionary. I was the one who could hear what they couldn't. But there was one thing none of them would ever know. I didn't just listen to words. I listened to the silence. I began to build a system, data from hundreds of interrogations, speech tempo, pauses, syntax variations. I didn't just study words. I studied how emotion bent language, hesitation in the subject line, tone shifts when lying, tiny details no one else noticed. But to me, they were a psychological map. At first, no one asked about the system. But then a young sergeant, during a confrontation with a local drug lord, remembered a pattern I'd presented and avoided unnecessary bloodshed. That story spread like smoke, invisible but unmistakable. One afternoon, I received an unexpected order. Report to Fort Meade to present my methods to a Cyber Command Review Board. I thought it was a mistake. I wasn't an analyst. I wasn't in cyber. I had no badge, just the unofficial nickname, Captain Nobody, back at Fort Drum. But orders were orders. So I went. The meeting room at Fort Meade was from another world. No snow, no freezing wind. Just cold LED lights, the scent of plastic and metal from massive servers humming like a mechanical beast. They didn't wear uniforms. They wore badges, modern soldiers, fighting wars with code and data streams. I stepped into a room where no one looked at each other, only at screens. And me, an MP from a frozen base, A girl who loved languages and Rimbaud was about to speak about syntax psychology. I presented. My voice was steady, each word chosen like a scalpel, precise and sharp. I guided them through the linguistic matrix I had built, showing how skewed syntax can signal deception, how repeated irregular structures betray false reports. When I finished, the room was silent, no applause, just slow nods. They understood the outcome, but not the path I took to get there. They saw the map, but not the compass. I gathered my notes, ready to walk away. Another technical briefing, soon to be shelved. But then, he appeared. He didn't look like anyone else in the room. Not impatient, not rushing to close a laptop. He stayed behind. His eyes were direct, not watching the slides, but watching me. "Captain Bennett," he said, his voice deep and grounded. "I'm Warrant Officer Ethan Cole, but you can call me Eli." No handshake, no flattery, just a simple nod, enough to let me know he was listening. Truly listening. You mentioned recognizing deception when someone reverses sentence structure while discussing logistics, Eli said. That isn't in any textbook. That's art. I froze. All these years, people had only cared about my outcomes, a confession, a report, a mission closed. No one ever asked how. No one cared about the process. But he did. Eli didn't just see the result. He saw the hand turning every gear, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. We had coffee at a small diner just outside the base gate. The place was quiet, smelled faintly of bacon grease. The waitress called everyone Hun. Conversation flowed like a stream. I told him about my mother, the woman who planted in me the seed of language, about a childhood spent curled around a French dictionary while my father trained Jason to assemble rifles blindfolded. I spoke without armor, something I rarely allowed myself to do. Eli spoke of encryption like it was poetry, of code that carried rhythm, tone. "Hackers have style," he said. "Sloppy ones leave chaos. Arrogant ones overcomplicate everything. The fearful build walls within walls. Everyone leaves a signature. You just have to know how to read it." I smiled. For the first time in years, a smile I didn't have to hide. "You decode machines," I said. "I decode people." We were both readers of silence. A few days later, I received an email from Eli. No long message, no flowery words, just a single link. Brené Brown's TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. Below the link, he had written one line: "Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is walking into battle, trembling." He saw me, not just the officer, not just the capability. He saw the fear I buried deep, the exhaustion that lived in every breath. One Saturday night, I sat alone in the MP office. Fluorescent lights harsh and cold. Outside, the wind howled. I was translating a thick intelligence report on cross-border terrorist activity. At 9 p.m., the door opened. Eli walked in, hot pizza in one hand, a cold can of Coke in the other. He said nothing, just sat down, opened his laptop, and worked beside me. No advice, no need for conversation, just presence. His presence was like an invisible hand on my shoulder, quietly whispering, "You're not alone anymore." That night, I understood something I had never known as a child. Family isn't where you're born. It's who chooses to stay when you fall apart. Eli, he was the first. And me, for the first time, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the mistake. I was simply a language they'd never learned. There was no defining moment when Eli became a part of my life. He didn't arrive like a storm. He wasn't some miracle. He came quietly, patiently, like the faint light at the end of a tunnel, not blinding, but just enough to keep me from losing my way. After that pizza night, we had an unspoken agreement. I wouldn't ask about the scars in his eyes, and he wouldn't mention the pain in my voice. We didn't need to say much. In my world, the ones who talk the most are often the ones who listen the least. But Eli, he listened with the kind of attention only someone who survived fractured data fields and digital betrayal could offer. One time, I asked him why he chose cyber intelligence. He took a sip of coffee and answered, without hesitation, because in the digital world, everything leaves a trace. Lies or truth, they both mark the code. People with power can manipulate data, but they can't erase their intent. I laughed, a bitter one. You know, I said, in my world, there are people who leave no trace at all. They manipulate with a glance, with silence. And the cruelest thing is, they can make others believe they're invisible. He looked at me, long and quiet. He didn't say a word, but that look, not pity, not curiosity, just presence, the kind that simply says, I'm here. That March, I was deployed to Camp Eagle, Bosnia, a place where every geopolitical map was blurred by the hatred still smoldering from old wars. I was tasked with facilitating a string of negotiations between two local factions, people who had lived in war longer than they'd lived in peace, and who trusted no one who spoke with an outside accent. This wasn't a battlefield of bullets. It was a land where a misplaced comma could ignite a massacre. And me, I walked in without a rifle, but with the ability to hear what wasn't being said. Before leaving base, I sent Eli a short message. Off to Bosnia, might lose contact. If I don't come back, take my mother's dictionary somewhere quiet. His reply was one word. Copy. In the military, it's the only way to say, I hear you. I'll honor this. At Camp Eagle, I worked 14-hour days. By daylight, I was a translator. By night, I was a human bridge between groups who hadn't shared a meal in decades. I listened to words, to silences, and sometimes the silence screamed louder than anything said aloud. During those days, for the first time, I felt truly needed, not as an ornament forced into a prestigious family, but as someone with actual worth. Then, one evening in early December, I received a call. The screen blinked with a name I thought I'd buried with the Kansas snow of Fort Riley, Richard Bennett. I froze. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, but something, instinct, hope, or plain foolishness, made me answer. His voice was the same, low, cold, unapologetic. Claire, your brother and I are here. We need to talk. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to, because the moment Jason chimed in, that smooth, buttered voice of his sliding through the line, I knew this wasn't a reunion. They didn't ask how I was doing, didn't commend me for my work in Bosnia, not a word about the nights I nearly died between enemy lines. Instead, my father asked me to falsify a report. A military contractor, Aegis Logistics, one of the suppliers for the camp, was under investigation. Their equipment didn't meet standards. It posed a risk to American lives. He wanted me to soften the language, downplay the severity, paint a rosier picture, he said, as if I were the family's personal PR rep. I remember going speechless, not because I was shocked, but because part of me had still been hoping that one day he'd see me as a soldier, as someone with honor, someone who knew right from wrong. But no, I was still just a tool, a convenient pawn in the rotten political game he and Jason were playing. I won't do it, I said, my voice barely audible. My father's tone changed instantly, that deep, menacing growl that used to make junior officers tremble during inspections. But I wasn't 17 anymore. Then Jason chimed in, that familiar half smirk in his voice, crackling through the line. This is your chance to prove you're actually useful to the family. Prove useful. Those words hit harder than any bullet, like a dull blade twisting in my chest. I hung up, didn't wait for their reply. My hands trembled, but inside, a stillness I'd never known. Because in that moment, I didn't just defy my father, I chose a side, and I knew the real war had just begun. 3 days later, the negotiations resumed, this time in a safe house on the edge of a small village. I tried not to think about the call. I focused, like I always did, on every micro expression, every carefully chosen word. But the communication system, something felt off. Static, dropouts, sudden silence. Then a voice in my earpiece. Not one of ours, a man's voice, speaking in Serbian. Slow, deep, cold. Malika, little whisper, does your father know he's disappointed in you? I froze. Whisper, my call sign, wasn't in any public records. Only a few people knew. Only my family knew. And then the world exploded. Glass shattered. Bullets ripped through the air. Screams, smoke, blood. One round grazed my shoulder, ripping cloth, tearing flesh. But I didn't feel pain. I felt betrayal. We had been sold out. Someone had handed over our exact location, our schedule, and even my psychological vulnerabilities straight to the enemy. And I knew exactly who had done it. As the rescue helicopter spotlight cut through the smoke, I looked up at the Bosnian night sky and made a promise to myself. If I survive this, I will not forgive. Not this time. I woke up in the field hospital at Camp Eagle. The wound in my shoulder had been stitched and wrapped carefully. The doctor said it wouldn't scar, but he didn't know. The thing that tore open wasn't in my skin. It was deeper, in my bones. After the attack, the official report claimed it was a security breach due to location error and unstable communications. I read the report in a kind of terrifying silence, polished language, twisted phrasing. It read exactly like the kind of syntax I use to decode deception in inmate interrogations. This time, I was the victim of the very language I once used to uncover lies. But they didn't know. I was an expert at reading what isn't said. And I knew, when truth is blurred, someone with power helped smudge the ink. 3 days later, I received transfer orders. They said it was to ensure my complete safety. But I knew better. I knew how the system punished those who refused to play by the unspoken rules. No charges, no demotion. I was buried alive in an administrative office at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. A professional death. Fort Belvoir was a mausoleum of white concrete. No more hurried footsteps in the field. No more tactical maps or breathless negotiations. Just me, a mountain of logistics files and dull, soul-numbing questions. They didn't want to silence me because I was weak. They silenced me because I knew too much. And worse, I said no. The first thing I did at my new desk wasn't unpack. I picked up the phone, dialed Eli, not through the standard comms. I accessed a secure line, one we had once set up to share classified documents. When he answered, I said only one thing, my voice low, flat, nearly emotionless. Eli, it's Claire. I need you. This isn't in any manual. It's not in any law, but it matters more than everything. Then I told him everything, the call from my father, the request to falsify the report, my refusal, the ambush, the Serbian voice that used my call sign, a name only my father and brother would have known, each word cut like a shard of glass. I had no tears left. What I had now was a slow-burning fire, one that would not be extinguished. Eli was silent for a long time after I finished. I expected him to tell me to be careful, to wait, to hold off, to gather more data. But he didn't. His voice came through the line, steady and strong, like a steel beam holding up a crumbling building. Claire, I don't care who they are, your father, your brother, even the goddamn president. No one gets to do that to an American soldier. No one. A pause. Send me everything. We're going to burn that system down from the inside. I began the only way I knew how, with language. I tore through the logistics reports from Aegis Logistics, hundreds of pages of carefully worded nonsense, optimized performance metrics. Operator-induced malfunction, routine maintenance per schedule. But I saw the cracks, overuse of specific phrases, irregular verb tense shifts, abrupt switches from technical to bureaucratic language, always where something needed to be hidden. I pulled maintenance logs, cross-referenced every email. I found dozens of cases where faults were blamed on soldiers, but were, in fact, due to structural defects in the equipment. Meanwhile, Eli worked the digital front. He traced the system logs from Camp Eagle. The logs from the night of the ambush had been erased. The system claimed data corruption, but Eli knew better. Lost data was the oldest trick in the book to bury the truth. He didn't search for the missing file. He searched for its shadow. He followed backup caches, dug through partially encrypted data packets, and finally, he found what no one ever wanted him to find, an unauthorized port connection, opened just hours before the ambush. The connection linked to a private server. Owner, Aegis Logistics. We barely slept. Just coffee, data, and rage. Until one night, around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Eli, secure line. I picked up. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It was tight, sharp, and trembling with fury. I found it, Claire. I've got the proof, and you need to hear this. He sent me an audio file. I decrypted it, opened the file. The first voice was Jason's, cold, smug, not even trying to mask his intent. Dad played his part. Now it's your turn. Just make sure the incident is convincing enough to silence her permanently. My heart stopped. Eli found another file, a contract, a special budget approval document for Aegis, dated the day after the ambush. At the bottom of the page, Richard Bennett's signature. I sat frozen in the dark, the pale blue glow of the monitor washing over my face. What I felt in that moment wasn't pain. It was truth. Cold, clear, undeniable. My father My brother. They had tried to kill me, to protect a contract. I had the evidence. I had the truth. But I also knew if I submitted it through official channels, it would be strangled in the administrative machinery of the military. And they, Richard and Jason, had enough power to make anything vanish. I needed a stage, and I knew exactly where to go. I chose the one path no one would expect, to bring the truth into the light, right in the place that once felt darkest. I didn't file a report with the Inspector General. I didn't submit documents to Internal Affairs. I didn't run to the media or a legal team. I sent it to the right person. General Thomas Gray, commander of the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division, the only man who once stood up for me at the Pentagon when my own father humiliated me in front of hundreds of officers. He wasn't someone easily moved, but I knew one thing. To him, honor wasn't a decorative concept. It was a principle, a way of life. I sent a heavily encrypted email. Subject line, "You once stood for the truth. This is when the truth needs you back." Attached were the audio file of Jason discussing permanent silence, the signed contract by my father green-lighting post-ambush funding for Aegis, the system logs from Aegis's private server, my full linguistic analysis revealing deliberate manipulation of technical language, no commentary, no poetic flourishes, just one final line. The honor of this uniform is under threat, and it's not coming from outside. 3 days passed, no reply, no calls, no warnings. I started to doubt myself. Maybe even General Gray couldn't go up against the long shadow of the Bennett family until I received a formal summons, short and stamped with the seal of the Pentagon. Captain Claire Bennett requested to attend the annual recognition ceremony in Washington, D.C. as a distinguished guest. No explanation, no reason given, but I understood. The stage was set. I returned to the scene of my first public humiliation, the Grand Hall of the Pentagon, where my father once reduced me to nothing during a military ceremony. Everything looked the same: the carpeted aisles, the flag-lined walls, the serious faces. But this time, I didn't walk in small. I didn't come to bow. I came to look them in the eye. I was seated mid-row near the main stage, still in uniform, deep navy blue, but I felt entirely different. That 35-year-old girl sitting in row 10 years ago, shaking under her father's gaze. She was gone. The woman here today, she bore wounds, yes, but she carried fire. I looked up at the VIP platform. My father, General Richard Bennett, stood tall, stiff like a bronze statue, his face carved in cold dignity, draped in the illusion of authority I once longed to be part of. Jason was there too, smiling, confident, waving at colleagues like he was about to receive the Medal of Honor. They had no idea. They still believed they had won. The ceremony began. My father's name was called to receive the Lifetime Achievement Medal. Thunderous applause shook the room. He walked to the stage, hands firm, eyes scanning the crowd, proud, steady, until General Gray took the podium, silver-haired, stoic, not a word wasted. "Before we conclude tonight's ceremony," he said, "there is a duty I must fulfill, one that cannot be ignored, not if we still believe in the honor this uniform demands." The room fell into a hush. No one understood what was coming. The screen behind the stage lit up. A digital map appeared, highlighting the unauthorized server connections between Aegis Logistics and Camp Eagle. Next, a contract. The camera zoomed in slowly on the signature at the bottom, General Richard Bennett. A wave of murmurs erupted, gasps, confusion. My father's face froze. A sound echoed from the ceiling speakers. Jason's voice, clear, cold. Dad's done his part. Now it's your turn. Just make the incident convincing enough to keep her silent forever. The entire hall froze. No one moved, not a single cough. I stood, called to the stage. I looked down. Jason staggered to his feet, face pale, lips moving in desperate silence. Two military police officers approached. No invitation needed. Jason was handcuffed. My father remained motionless, stiff, like a statue. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw fear in that man's eyes. Not anger, not contempt, real fear. The kind a man feels when he realizes he has lost everything. General Gray turned to me and nodded, slowly, deliberately. No speech, no grand declaration. But I knew he had just returned to me something I thought I had lost forever. Justice. I walked off that stage, didn't look back, didn't need to, because this time I was not the shadow. I was the light. I left the Pentagon in the middle of a storm made of silence. No applause. No one called my name, but no one dared stop me either. I walked past the same halls where my father's footsteps once pounded like thunder, past the portraits of men once called legends, and with every step, I made a silent statement. Legacy is not inherited, it's earned. After the ceremony, I spent 3 full hours in a closed room with the Special Investigations Unit from the Office of the Inspector General. I didn't dramatize my testimony. I didn't need to. The evidence Eli and I had gathered painted the truth in harsh, undeniable light. The official investigation lasted months, but the effects of that exposure spread like wildfire. No one in the military could look at the name Bennett without feeling something sharp in their throat, a sting of betrayal, a bitterness they couldn't swallow. My father's name, General Richard Bennett, was removed from buildings, halls, and honorary boards. My brother's name, Jason Bennett, entered the permanent record as a disgrace. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought vengeance would taste sweet, but the truth is, I only felt empty. A week later, I saw Jason for the last time. I had just left the investigation office when 2 MPs escorted him past me. His uniform no longer had epaulets, no insignia, just wrinkled folds, and a broken man behind them. When he saw me, Jason stopped. His eyes were bloodshot, brimming with hatred. "Are you happy now, Claire?" he growled. "You destroyed the whole family. This is your fault. It's always been you. The selfish little sister who couldn't stay in her place." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, really looked, as if I were staring back at my own childhood. An entire past dimmed beneath the shadow of this very brother. Then I spoke soft as wind, sharp as glass. "I didn't destroy this family. You and Dad did that yourselves. I just stopped being silent." Jason thrashed, furious, but he couldn't break free from the MP's grip. I turned and walked away. Didn't look back. This time, I didn't need to run, didn't need to shrink, because for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt. My father wasn't arrested immediately. His rank entitled him to a special process, hearings, internal reviews, opportunities to explain. But he knew the game was over. A week later, he requested to see me. I didn't say yes right away. It took me 3 days, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to face him. No more avoiding, no more holding on to illusions. We met at a small cafe in Arlington, quiet enough that the server didn't ask names, just handed over menus and walked away. He sat there, back straight, holding his coffee like he was still gripping a deployment order. But his eyes, they no longer burned. They were ashes. "Claire," he began, this is for you." He pushed a small black velvet box across the table. I opened it, a West Point ring. The ring I'd once dreamed of touching, just once, throughout my entire childhood. A symbol of glory, of recognition I had never been granted. "I want you to keep it," he said, "to remember that we're still family." Family? I took a deep breath, then slid the box back across the table. "I don't need your symbols. I needed a father. And you've never been that." I stood up. The chair creaked loud against the floor. A few heads turned. I didn't care. I didn't yell. I didn't blame. I didn't cry. I just said one last thing, voice low, firm, and unmistakably clear. "I hope one day you'll understand what truly deserves respect. But I won't be waiting for that day." And I walked out of the cafe. The sky over Arlington was gray that afternoon, as if saving its rain for someone who'd earned it. But I didn't feel heavy. I felt light, unbearably light. I had lived most of my life shackled by an invisible chain, the desperate need to be seen, to be acknowledged. And now I had unchained myself. No forgiveness needed, no embrace, no one to say, "You did well." I knew it for myself. I no longer needed anyone to approve my existence. A few months later, General Gray contacted me again. He said there was a new opportunity, a new chapter for someone like me. "You didn't just survive, Claire. You lived with purpose, and I think it's time you taught others how to do the same." I left field operations, not because I was tired, but because I had finished my fight. I transferred to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and began building a new training program at the U.S. Army Military Police School, Cross-Cultural Communication Strategy, a course not designed to create soldiers who speak many languages, but ones who can understand silence. On my first day in the new office, I saw a small brass plaque on the door. It didn't say my name, just 2 words, "The Whisper Room." I knew exactly who put it there. Eli. I sat in the old chair at the wooden desk, looking around the room. No more cold podiums. No more barked commands from my father. Just me, and young soldiers waiting to learn this. Intellect isn't a burden. It's what can save a life. I didn't win by shouting louder. I won by whispering loud enough that no one could ignore it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to be seen. Years passed after I left the bloodied battlefields and political chessboards. I lived a quiet life, no more explosions, no more threats hidden behind every call. But peace didn't come all at once. It came slowly, like a wound torn open not by bullets, but by betrayal, healing scar by scar. On my first day teaching at Fort Leonard Wood, a young officer asked, "Captain Bennett, why is it called the Whisper Room? I thought officers were supposed to learn how to command, not whisper." I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room. young faces full of fire, but still carrying the shadow of doubt in their eyes. Then I replied softly, because those who scream only get heard, but those who whisper at the right moment can change the entire war. My course didn't include PT drills, no guns, no whistles, no barked orders, only language, gestures, breaths. We studied how to read a stare, how syntax shifts when fear creeps in, how to spot panic in repetition or deceit in a misplaced pause. I taught them what I once used to survive, not to become spies, but to understand people. One student, Davis, had been a special forces operator. On day one, he said bluntly, "I don't buy into all this emotion stuff saving lives. On the field, it's kill or be killed." I didn't argue. 3 weeks later, he came to me after class, eyes red. Today, I interrogated a 13-year-old suspected of carrying intel for the enemy. He didn't speak at first, but then I remembered what you said. Children often lie by repeating exactly what adults taught them. And he did. The boy wasn't a spy. He was just echoing what his mother was forced to say before she disappeared. He swallowed hard. Today, I didn't shoot a child. Today, I whispered. Word of the whisper room spread around the base. They came, soldiers whose scars weren't on skin, but buried deep inside. A nurse from the Iraq front once asked me, "How do you forgive someone who betrayed you?" I answered without hesitation, "I don't forgive, I let go." Because forgiveness feels like charity, but letting go is freedom. I was no longer a military police officer. I was a keeper of light in the darkest corners of the human mind. Every day I wrote, not reports, but memoirs. Records of wars without bullets, inner wars, battles between the unspoken and the manipulated truth. Eli was still there, not in the office, not in the shadows. He worked remotely, coordinating cyber intel. But every week, he sent me an email. Nothing dramatic, just a few lines. Found a back door in the new defense contract today. Codename Blue Echo. Looks like an old enemy's signature. Or, dreamt you were reading Rumi last night. I don't speak Farsi, but it felt peaceful, strange. I've never said I love you to Eli. We never needed to. Love for us is the quiet knowing that the other won't leave, even when you break apart. No flowers, no theatrics, just steadfastness. And I know he is home, the home I never had, finally real, no permission required. In my 10th winter at Fort Leonard Wood, I was invited back to Washington to speak at a summit on unconventional military strategy. I wore my old uniform without the captain insignia because I had retired. Only a small ribbon remained, a special commendation from the Army Inspector General. I stepped up to the podium before hundreds of commanders, generals, and strategists. No trembling, no bowed head, and I began in the same voice once called dull and powerless. I'm not here to talk about victory. I'm here to talk about what the reports never capture. Why a 13-year-old boy carried a map of a U.S. base. Why an officer would betray the Army to protect his sister. And why, sometimes, silence is more dangerous than gunfire. I paused, then delivered the closing line. Because power isn't just who speaks the loudest, it's who dares to whisper the truth. I used to be the one who whispered, and it was because I whispered that I survived. Never underestimate the softest voice in the room. because sometimes it's the only one telling the truth. As I stepped down from the stage, the entire room rose to its feet. I didn't cry. There were no more tears left for the past, only space now to move forward. Today, I live in a small wooden house in Montana. Not many people know who I am. I teach at the local university, a course called Communication and Power. Sometimes I still receive handwritten letters from former soldiers. Dear Ms. Bennett, I didn't shoot. I listened, and because of that, I survived. On my desk, there's still a small velvet box, but inside, there's no West Point ring anymore. I replaced it with a note my mother left before she passed, written in French. I did not raise you to live in someone else's shadow. You are the light, and even the faintest light can guide the lost. I fold the paper gently, return it to its place. Then I sit down and begin writing the final chapter of the book. Whisper, the life of a quiet fighter. I've walked a path many never dare to start, a journey not just of survival, but of rising from wounds carved by the very hands that were supposed to protect me. I'm not telling this story to ask for sympathy. I'm telling it for anyone who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, called useless, or forgotten inside their own home, to know they're not alone. If you've listened this far and something in this story reached a place in you you've kept hidden, leave a comment, even just a single word, because it might be the first time you've dared to speak. Don't be afraid if your voice shakes. Don't be ashamed if your words come out as a whisper. Whispers are still voices, and sometimes they're stronger than screams. If you've ever been hurt by your family, by the system, or by a silence that lasted too many years, subscribe to this channel, not to support me, but so we don't abandon each other on this journey. Because maybe you're not ready to speak yet, but I will speak for you until you're strong enough to speak for yourself.